they said, here's 185,000 euros for working capital. You can either pay yourself 185,000 euros and last a year, or you can put that into, seed, but not seed capital, but, searching out deals and getting something over the line. We created something called the Ugly Campus, and the website was lovelyinside.com. And it was as simple as that, to say, look, if this goes well, it's all BBC. If it goes badly, it's TCN. And with reputational risk, I'd love to get into the UK market, and I'm looking for a sort of young, ambitious guy, preferably with a property background, that wants to set up his own business. If you know of anyone like that in the UK, then I'd love to meet them and potentially back them to grow the business in the UK. And of course, I went to bed that night with my head absolutely spinning with ideas.
Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Pleased to be here. Took a bit of planning, but we got here.
Yeah, we did. It's been quite a long time coming, but it's great to have you in the podcast studio. So, as you know, a place that we always like to start these conversations is how and why did you get into real estate?
I got into real estate by accident, which I think quite a lot of your guests seem to do the same. So about 16 years old, I think my mum said to me, what are you going to do? And obviously as a 16-year-old, you don't have much of an idea. And I lived up in Bury St Edmunds, up in Suffolk. So she sent me off to see the local land agent, who sat, behind his big desk with a tweed jacket, and chatted to him about doing rural land management. It sounded like it was out and about and sounded quite fun. So that first piqued the interest. In fact, that was the guy that ended up becoming president of the RICS back in the day, Simon Potts. And so I then applied to do surveying and accidentally ended up doing, what was it called now? Commercial estate management, I think it was, which ended up in commercial world rather than rural. But with my A-levels, I got up to Nottingham Trent and did that, and the rest is history.
So no family or no contacts in the real estate world?
No, not at all. No, it never crossed my radar before those conversations. And if I'm honest, I turned up at Nottingham not really knowing what to expect. And it was a sandwich course. I had a year out in Cambridge in the third year, and suddenly just got into, the excitement of the property world, which is people and deals and activity, and wasn't all behind a desk, and required sort of interpersonal skills and interests that you could align with other people, and that sort of suited me for sure. It wasn't going to be my A-levels that got me anywhere.
I was going to say, well, as a kid, kind of growing up, what kind of kid were you?
I was just active, sport, fun, pretty sensible. I mean, I wasn't kind of, out there with some extreme stories of a difficult childhood. It was good fun up in Suffolk, lots of sailing and sport, and good schools, good mates, and the Suffolk lifestyles, good community and close family and friends, and so it's just a happy upbringing. But I was the highest academic achiever in my family with a 2-2 from Nottingham Trent. So all our family of found careers with people and entrepreneurship, I guess. Property just happens to be where I landed. So
entrepreneurship is kind of, it runs through the Pearce family bloodline, does it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Brother and family have all run their own businesses. Dad was an accountant, so he was straight down the middle, and we used to come up with entrepreneurial ideas, and he'd after amortization and all the sort of usual taxes and everything else, would tell us it wasn't a good idea. But so we weren't inspired necessarily by a family business, but maybe all that sort of negativity made us feel that we could get out there and do something a bit different. And my grandfather was an entrepreneur in his day, so there's a bit of history there. But really it was just having curious minds and getting out there and enjoying people and opportunity, I guess.
So what was your sandwich placement in Cambridge? What did you do?
So I was at Bidwell's in Cambridge, and I was managing Trinity College's estate, basically. So it was downtown Cambridge, amazing real estate. And I worked for a chap called Charlie Cummins up in the Cambridge office, who was he was a good socialiser down at the college, and knew all the sort of lovely dinner parties and events, and a real gentleman around Cambridge. And I just held on to his coattails and learnt management actually the hard way, which was getting bins out the way of fire escapes and learning about service charge and leases, a lot of rent reviews. I was talking 95, so I learned how to write nil increase quite a lot in a rent review clause, and but it was just good basic, understanding where the value lay in a lease. So I was very lucky that placement sort of set me off in a direction of really understanding the basics of property. And at Nottingham, I really enjoyed valuation, economics. Those were the sort of key bits that really sort of piqued my interest. And then architecture, wasn't such of an interest at the time, but through valuation and economics, I could see, there's some exciting opportunities in real estate, and coupled with then going to Cambridge and having a lot of fun working with some really good people up at the in the management department up there, spurred me on to really get stuck in. And funny enough, going back to the final year at Nottingham was quite hard because I'd had a taste of deals, however small, little shop lettings or office lettings, but I had a taste of the real world and felt that I was quite good at that. So to go back into the academic side of it and be hearing from lecturers that in my very youthful mind had never left academia, and I knew more, obviously having done 9 months in a commercial world, got through that final year and couldn't wait to get down to London and get stuck in.
You landed at DTZ, if I'm not mistaken.
I did land at DTZ, yeah. I went straight into the city, a chap called Nick Butterworth, working in rent reviews and valuation in the city, which was perfect for me because I wanted to be an investment agent on day one and thought, I'd be amazing at it, and was completely wrong. Just got into valuation and learned the hard way that you work your way up and you learn about, again, in leases, what every minutiae of a rent review clause means, all the assumptions. We're doing rent reviews in the Lloyd's building, and there was no margin for error. The values you're talking about have massive implications. So it knocked out of me pretty quickly the kind of vagueness and the slightly, bullshit that I probably had. And
cavalier, flamboyant.
Correct, yeah. And just, between the management at Bidwell's and then the rent review and the valuation, it was a proper schooling in the nuts and bolts of property, and worked for some amazing people, Bryn Williams and other characters, James Max at the time, really knew their stuff. And you go into these huge office buildings where every pound on or off a rent really matters. And you learn, the detail of it, which was a great grounding for me. I did about 9-10 months there and eventually managed to get across to the West End and get into the investment team with Mike Cutteridge and Marcus Wood. And we had a lot of fun in that team. And then I could start to get into the deals, but with that really solid grounding that, I was still, doing photocopying and binding documents for a good year or so. But that was an amazing team to get in. John Knowles, who's still very active on there, and Jason Winfield and all those characters. And we had a lot of fun and amazing clients and amazing deals. I was doing retail warehousing mainly and leisure. So did that for a few years, and qualified there.
The thing that stands out for me there is the fact that, clearly you had aspirations and drive and you wanted to get into the investment side, but actually, as difficult as it was to maybe not get into that seat, to get schooled in the L&T and the valuation department and actually get your letters, and probably as a personality kind of do some hard yards in a rotation that you probably didn't enjoy or didn't come naturally, but actually gave you the platform to be a better investment agent when it came to your opportunity. It's probably a really good kind of case in point for those earlier on in their career who are kind of have aspirations to go and do deals off the bat, but actually...
Yeah, absolutely. Just be patient. That grounding has, call it 2-3 years, has stood me in incredible stead. The professionalism, the attention to detail, which I didn't have before. And it gives you confidence, because then after that, you can go on to anything knowing that you really understand it and you're going to make good decisions. And look, when you talk about, younger people and looking at their careers, I think getting that grounding and just trying to work for impressive people, inspirational people, not necessarily inspirational, but talented people in their jobs. You just learn an enormous amount. And I was very lucky with the people I worked for. It was, a tough schooling. You were photocopying, and I had one trip where it was the THI Leisure Fund that we were doing a forward funding or raising funding with, for a leisure fund, and I was sent off to go and do some photography of Bolton and Chester and a couple of other places. And I think I enjoyed borrowing. There was a director's sort of Mondeo injection, I think it was, that was the sort of, the prize, the motor that I managed to borrow to go and get the miles to make sure he had enough business miles on his car. And I went around all these sites and took pictures, got back to the office after 2 days out and got these pictures printed off in A3 that was supposedly going into this brochure. And I was hauled into Mike Cutteridge's office and the pictures on the table, and he goes, "What on earth are these?" And they were pretty awful, and then he showed me a brochure shot and said, "Right, that's what we need." And, I learned that you can't just take it on your camera and bring it back. So it was funny little lessons like that, and I was another time there was a deal that we were marketing, and there was a big hitting agent who was, one of the movers and shakers. And we were selling this building called Charles Square in Bracknell, which was a big development at the time. And I was given the list, and it had the A targets, which was a number of agents that clearly were most likely to place the deal with the right buyer, the B targets, and then the C targets. And I phoned up, all the A targets and said, "Look, we've got this opportunity coming to the market, and you'd like you to place it with who you think would buy it." And it was Franco as the guy.
Franco Sidoli.
There you go. And the phone rang at my desk, and I answered it. And he said, "Hello, is that Richard Pearce?" "Yeah, yes, hello, Richard Pearce. It's Franco here." I think Franco, literally, I don't know. He goes, "Yeah, I hear you're selling an asset in Bracknell." "That's right." He goes, "Well, I haven't heard about it. Could I just have your full name?" "Yeah, Franco Sidoli." So I looked down the list, and on the B list is Franco Sidoli. So I said, "Oh yes, you're on the B list. So we've put it to the A list, and next week we're going to put it to the B list." And he just went, "Thanks very much." Put the phone down, and then I felt this presence behind me, and it was Marcus Rose. You might remember was at DTZ, England fullback actually, but big hitting senior director at DTZ, and he was stood behind my desk, and I was like, "Hello," and he went. And the whole floor went quiet with, Bruce Nutman and all the, David Haynes, all the kind of agents around. He went, "You've just told Franco Sidoli he's on the B list to receive a deal." And the place just burst into hysterics and, so learnt another difficult lesson. So, all of those bouncing off a few errors points you in the right direction. They were some tough lessons, but done by, people that really knew what they were doing, and you don't make those mistakes again. So.
And I guess for people listening to this who don't know who Franco Sidoli is, he's like the biggest, best known investment agent there's ever been.
I think that's probably a good description. Yeah.
Who exclusively represented Nick Leslau.
Correct.
Another kind of titan of the real estate industry.
Yeah.
So he should have been top of your A list.
He should have been top of the A list. And I learned a lesson that day, and luckily was allowed to continue in that investment world. But yeah.
You were at DTZ for a few years, kind of schooled in kind of investment. You moved from there, if I'm not mistaken, to Shaftesbury PLC as an asset manager. Why did you want to move to the principal side, and why did you want to move out of investment agency and into asset management?
I was in a bit of a hurry. I'm the youngest of three, so I've always been trying to keep up with older brother and sister. And I went to uni at 18. I was in London by 22, qualified at 23, and then did 2 years of investment agency. And I got to 25, and my appraisal was along the lines of, "You're doing really well. You're about to be made an associate director, and you'll then be able to choose, between the Mondeo X and the Mondeo XR." And that was a real kind of progression. And I just thought, there's more to life than this, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it, but I realised I'd launched into a full-on career that I could be doing for another 20, 30 years. And I suddenly had that moment of, actually, I'm young and there's a whole world out there. So, and obviously having 2 years post-qualification, you're in a pretty good place in those days to then get other jobs. We're talking around 2000, 99, I think it was. And so I went off travelling. And I was going to sail across the Atlantic. And a mate of mine phoned up at the last minute and said, "Don't go, let's go travelling." He'd quit his job in the city. And so we went off to Thailand and Laos and Cambodia and ended up in Australia. And I taught sailing there for 6-8 months and New Zealand for a month. And happily, just so happened the British Lions were playing in 2001. So we did that series and had a lot of fun. So that was another amazing thing to do, age 25, because, you go and reflect, and I was having an incredible time, teaching sailing on the beach and in the gym and out running. But after about 8-9 months, I was so bored, and as amazing as on paper this life looked, I knew all my friends were getting on doing things, and I was having a whale of a time, but I hit the boundary of deep boredom and actually excitement to really do something, with my career or the next stage of my career. So it was a great lesson, because whenever after that I was frustrated in the job, I just remember back to being on that beach thinking this is supposed to be heaven and I'm bored, So I came back after the Lions tour.
And you didn't gap year then, post-school?
Didn't gap year.
Post-uni?
No.
So this was your equivalent of kind of that year out, and a taste of what retired life looked like.
Yes,
and you got the sense
prematurely,
that's
and
not
I did.
for you.
I like in life to, acknowledge decision-making points. So the decision might be, don't do anything different, but I think it's really important in life when there is a moment to make a decision that you step back and acknowledge it. So, as I say, the decision might be, I'm going to change completely. The decision might be, actually, I'm doing the right thing. But it's important to acknowledge moments in life, I think, when there is an opportunity to make a decision. And in Australia, there was that moment to go, actually, the lifestyle, type work is for me. I can teach sailing. I can probably do something else and just have a really nice life and pay along the way. Or actually can get back into it and go for it and see what's possible in the commercial world. And it was a great decision to be able to make, and I've never looked back. And as I say, it was a really helpful moment in life, because you realise that that greener grass maybe isn't the right way to go. So that was great. I recommend anyone either do a gap year straight after school or do it when you're 25. It doesn't really matter. As it happened, we had our first bonuses, I think, when we went off travelling. So whilst all the other travellers were eating pot noodles, we could go out for the occasional steak. We tried to do living on £1 a day. That lasted about 2 weeks. And then we worked our way as well. And it was a great year. But you certainly came back ready to really get stuck into something with a clear mind of what we wanted to do. So I was lucky when I came back. A couple of job opportunities. One with a retail agency, investment agency, sort of boutique agency, and the other one was Shaftesbury. And I got some very good advice from friends in the industry that they reckon Shaftesbury is the right way to go, and so that's where I went. Yeah.
Why did you go that way?
I wanted to get client side. Because I enjoyed the agency. I enjoyed the buzz of it. There was a deal we did down in Portsmouth to Ermine Seller, actually. He was another fascinating character. And he owned a site down at Fratton Park down in Portsmouth. And there's a piece of land that he bought pretty cheaply because it was, good access, but not a particularly interesting place. I'll never forget, he then signed, in fact, it had an old home base on it, B&Q. And he bought this thing for next to nothing, because it only had 2 years left on lease. And we said to him, look, if you can buy this and do something with it, there's some real money to be made. And he got a new lease signed by B&Q for 25 years and sold it for whatever, back in the day, 5%, whatever it was, and made an enormous amount of money. And we got paid our fee. That was great. But I was like, hang on a minute. We've just given him the best idea in the world, and he's very happy to pay the fee because he's made a fortune. And in my young mind, I was like, that I want to be doing that, and also I found, a bit like the Charles Square one in Bracknell, brilliant, really interesting to sell it. You meet fascinating people and you do the deal, and there's a high point when you sign them, or they sign the contract. But then the line goes dead. You don't see anything after that. And I wanted to get more involved in the development and how do you add value and, the whole life cycle of properties. So hence wanting to go client side, or deciding to go client side. So I arrived at Shaftesbury, and it couldn't have been a better place to then learn all about being client side.
Shaftesbury is Shaftesbury Capital PLC. It's gone through some changes and emerged with Capco a couple of years ago. Can you just give me a bit of an overview of the portfolio and the role and remit that you had when you joined the business?
So I enjoyed joined. I can't remember exactly when. It must have been 2000, 2001. But they literally had just bought the Carnaby estate, and I'll never forget. I think it was being marketed at about 72 million. and Shaftesbury paid 81 million, and the market was in shock because they'd paid 10 million roughly over the asking price and blown everyone else out the water. And Shaftesbury was well known, but it was a relatively small business, the Levy family, and they had assets in Swansea, Newcastle, and London, and they decided to really double down on what they had in the villages, or create these villages in London. So the market was in shock that Shaftesbury have appeared and blown all the big players out the water and paid this fortune, for the Carnaby estate. And I arrived just after that. And I walked in the office, and I have to say, day one, I thought I made an enormous mistake because I walked in deep, carpets and this sort of silence, whereas I've been in agency and, with all these boys playing rugby and hockey and sailing and all these great things. And suddenly I'd walked into this seemingly like library, and everyone had their own offices. And Jonathan Lane was CEO at the time, and Peter Levy sat in his big office down the end, and I was shown my office, and I sort of sat down, lonely in my office, and learned very quickly that it's a very different business, in terms of being on the principal side. Things happen in a much more considered way. It's all long term, whereas the agencies, how many calls have you made that day? How many deals have you got on? It's all buzz, buzz, buzz. But very quickly, I found that Shaftesbury were the most phenomenal team of people. Very, very different, just very calm, kind sort of people that all help each other out. There's a common cause around this estate. And my remit was to come in and work on the Carnaby estate with Simon Quayle and start to bring together the 8 streets, so Newburgh and Carnaby and Kingly Court, which at the time was an old derelict site with one printer in it. And that my job was to help Simon really sort of redevelop it and turn it into the Carnaby estate. So that's what I was working on. Julia Wilkinson was sat opposite doing all the leisure and restaurant side of it, and she very kindly kind of took me under her wing and explained how to do the management and how the systems all worked. And it was just a very impressive team of people. Jonathan Lane was phenomenal working with the city. I mean, he'd spend his days walking the streets with all the suits from the city, and they just hung off his every word. He was a very sort of quiet, considered man, but he didn't miss a trick, and I learned a lot from that. One time, a classic example is I'd found a deal in Leicester Square, and I was like, right, we can buy this one. And still with my slightly agency mindset, I was like, right, Shaftesbury buy stuff in the West End. Here's a restaurant with upper parts, we can put another level on the top, and we'll buy it for 5%. And so Jonathan sat me down and he said, right, talk me through your appraisal. Well, the income's this and the costs of that. So if we buy it, we can make 5%. Okay, and how are we going to make money? Well, rents will grow, and then you'll make 6%. He's like, how are we actually going to make money? And that was a question that I was just in the mindset of buying stuff in the West End. And I learned how to really create value out of real estate through working with the Shaftesbury guys. And a lot of that, the learnings were about creating a concept and a destination, and also working where you create value through the sum of the parts. So Carnaby would be a classic example where, we started to build the brand. We've got the 8 streets. And rather than go for the big high street brands, we went out searching for small up-and-coming brands, because if you just put the Boots and the Next and everything else on that high street, you might as well go to Oxford Street or your local shopping centre. How do you create something that's a real destination where people will come for a sense of discovery, a new restaurant, a new retailer? And that really appealed to me. And if you put that under the Carnaby brand, we always said that Carnaby is a global brand. It really is a global brand. It's just not a very good one when we bought it, because it was Kiss Me Quick hats and mugs and T-shirts. But the hardest thing is to grow a brand. You can adjust a brand's perception, and that all those sort of lessons were fascinating and something that in real estate you don't really learn. So we had this global brand that had a reputation of go and get your, I love Carnaby T-shirt, and all we had to do was twist that brand around and say, actually, it's a really interesting place to go and discover new retailers, cool brands, 55 DSL, the diesel sub-brand. And my friends would laugh at me because actually for a while got quite trendy in terms of clothing brands. But, creating an environment where people would come to find new and different things really appealed. And of course, the one, bringing in a small brand that was a startup retailer didn't have nearly the value of a strong covenant. But when you put 100 of those together, everyone wants to be there, and you create value in a very different way. So there's a lot of learnings there. In fact, I had one classic example where Next phoned us up and said, the agents said, good news, Next have decided to take the store at the bottom of Carnaby Street. And, they'll take a 10-year lease and rents. And, obviously with our covenant, we want a decent deal on it. And I said to them, sorry, no, we're not interested. And they were like, what do you mean we're not interested? Every high street and every shopping centre is desperate to court us, and we get long rent frees. And I said, well, the problem is, we want to put in a really interesting brand in there. We don't want just another high street. And they just couldn't believe it, because every landlord adds value by putting in a strong covenant and a long lease. And we actually put the Puma concept store in there. And the value it adds to the rest of the estate versus having Next there was far bigger than just having the covenant of an X. So all of those sort of lessons were fascinating in terms of concept, brand, and then Kingly Court in itself, turning that into a retail destination that was very different. All created something very special that Shaftesbury are experts at. Yeah.
Were there many other property companies doing what Shaftesbury were doing at the time?
Not at all. No. I mean,
complete outlier.
Yeah.
Short leases, but that kind of curation, tenant mix, profile, brand.
Yeah.
And trying to get real estate to intersect with how that kind of looks and feels, and
it's
placemaking, destination creation.
I'm sure one of your listeners will be outraged, and it was happening at the time, but I didn't know of anyone else that was intentionally curating villages. So you'd have the meatpacking district in New York, or Soho in itself is a brand, isn't it? So you definitely had Granville Island in Canada, in Vancouver, and so you had these places that had sort of happened because of history, but not to my knowledge was anyone curating that sort of village destination in cities. I mean, obviously a sort of out of town retailer, that sort of the discount retailers had the villages, but not in an urban environment like that. No, and it was just fascinating because it gathered this momentum, and I really liked the sort of looking left when everyone else was looking right, and creating something that over time you could just sense the atmosphere building there. People would come and be in awe of the shopping and the difference. I mean, I'd never be too busy to be beautiful was one of the retailers we brought in. I was down in a concept store in Poole that they'd had this idea. It was a little bit like, it was a sort of makeup brand, but, who am I to know if that's cool or not? But it just felt like different, interesting. And we put them into one of the units, and people were queuing out the door because it didn't exist anywhere else. And of course, then you have the spin-offs of going for lunch at Hakkasan who wanted to come in, and the whole thing just built an incredible energy to it. And, it was Shaftesbury's vision, really. And as I say, I walked in on day one, and you wouldn't have spotted anyone that seemingly would have that sort of vision, but those guys did, and they just were relentless. And they're also a very good example of just relentlessly focusing on your niche. And what you see today is the result of that.
Yeah, and Julia Wilkinson, who you touched on, she's still there. The tenure and the team and the quality, and I've been very fortunate over the last few years to help build out their team.
Yeah.
And put a number of people with the business. And you kind of mentioned you're retained on a mandate with Shaftesbury. People would shut their right arm off to get in the mix there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was when I left Shaftesbury, so I did about 3 years there, and when I left, there was a shock. It was like I was leaving the family. And I was the first one ever to leave Shaftesbury, which is a badge of honour in some ways. But it was utter shock because I think, certainly there was a really interesting career path for me there. But I suspect probably about now, my time might be coming. Who knows? I don't know what the upper management there are doing, but
there's been a little bit of change with the merger and the two cultures coming together.
So I left really because I loved it, but the vision that it had taken to do that, I was fulfilling someone else's vision, and I think having seen that really made me feel I want to do this, but I want to have had the original vision and make it happen. So, at Shaftesbury, it was a wonderful, happy time, brilliant people, Hodnett Martin Smith back in the day, all the agents, and they treated their suppliers really well. It was all long-term relationships. It really was a family. And I was a bit mad to leave, but I just had this burning desire to do a Shaftesbury, basically, is the way I describe it. And in fact, a few years later, after the financial crisis, 2009, and life was pretty tough doing my own business. And my brother, who I'm very close to, and he runs his own business. So I remember him saying, he goes, "Are you still glad you left Shaftesbury?" Because they were incredibly generous employers in terms of holidays and cars and pensions. Well, all the ins and outs, but they were incredibly generous. And it was, you weren't having to go out and win business every day. It was this fantastic estate that you could keep nurturing and growing. And it was a wonderful, wonderful career. And I would have been very happy staying there and probably look a lot younger than I do now. But I remember my brother saying, "Are you still glad you left?" I said, "Look, ask me again in a few years' time." And, but at the time I was thinking I'd do anything to be back there in the safety and the family network. So, there was a bit of a shock when I left. And but I'm still, I love those guys. And that was a very, very special time, yeah.
And to square it off, it's worth over £1 billion today. So
well, look, hopefully I've played my part in that. I'm not sure they'd agree, but it was great to be part of the journey. Yeah, I do look at the accounts sometimes and think that 82 million, that was well worth spending the extra 9 or whatever it was to steal that one. Yeah.
You moved to Europa Capital Partners.
Yeah, I actually went to Capital and Counties for a bit first.
Did you?
Yeah. Which
isn't on your LinkedIn.
Isn't on my LinkedIn. It's funny that I slightly lose track. That was a very short stint. It should be on my LinkedIn. It's probably the same thing as Shaftesbury now, isn't it? Anyway, I went there for about 12 months, I should think. And it was a transition period for those guys. So John Saggers was running that at the time, MD of the Capital and Counties bit. And Gary Marcacelli was my boss. And I was brought in as acquisition surveyor, which sounded very exciting. So I was sort of combining being on the principal side, but in the investment side. So that sort of it sounded kind of exciting. And when I arrived, it was very much John Saggers had his business that he was close to retiring. And they had some incredible assets, stuff along Piccadilly and the Strand, and phenomenal portfolio. But they were very much the small propco next to the capital shopping centres at the time. So even though they had these incredible assets, we were sort of the sideshow. But we did have the remit to do the New Star Trust. It was one of these unit trusts at the time, and I mean back in the day they had these blue and pink signs everywhere saying make 6% on your money with property, you can't go wrong. That's what was this, 2003. So we had the mandate, so I was out buying for that. So I did that for a year, but it was a transition time for Capco actually, and whatever. I never quite worked out what happened, but I left and then went to Europa, and then Capco bizarrely then ended up marrying up with Shaftesbury, and I could have ended up back in the same place anyway. So that I was there before Ian Hawksworth got involved, and but it was interesting 10, 12 months. I had the fund manager constantly coming through going, "I've got another £60 million in this week we've got to invest in property, and what have you got?" I said, "Well, I've got this, Stratton Parker have suggested this office building in Wimbledon, but it's sort of 6.25%, it's crazy money." And this is sort of obviously precursor to what then happened. And he said, "But, the money in the fund is only earning 3%, so buy the bloody thing." So, all right, I'll buy it. And he makes his arbitrage. And everyone was like, "Wow, Capco are breaking new records in Wimbledon." And so it was a funny time because that was really just cheap money piling in on that fund to then get invested in property, which was the early days of then what eventually came. So, I moved to Europa and after 10, 12 months and joined Noel Manns, and that was a fascinating time. Rob Sim, who runs Europa now, was the asset manager, and I was the acquisitions guy. Looking back, when I describe it, I was probably chasing the titles. This was acquisition surveyor for Northern Europe, so this was really, the next step up. So I learnt almost to turn on Excel and kind of, do a couple of very basic kind of calculations on Excel, which in the private equity world didn't really cut the mustard, but I learnt fast. And Rob was very helpful. Some late nights trying to work out how to make the Excel spreadsheet work, and that was something I'd never done before. And it's funny with surveyors, you really, probably it's quite different now, I would think. But back in the day, you'd get to age 28, whatever, working for a private equity firm, and I'd never used Excel. It was all just in a program. So that was an education, a fast track education. And the first deal was we've got this company in Holland called TCN. They're buying the Hilversum Media Park, and they need 24 million euros of equity, and we need you to analyse the deal and get it over the line. And it has to happen by the end of Jan. We promised it will happen. No, sorry, March. It has to get done by March. And this was December when I joined. So I had a lot of long nights trying to work out, euros, square meters, Excel, and the rent roll was something like 1.5 million euros a year. And no, that's rubbish. It was about 12 million euros a year. And the thing was valued at, 100 and something million euros, all numbers I'd never seen before. And so I had a pretty stressful 3 months trying to get this deal worked out with Noel and Rob. Anyway, we ended up buying it, and TCN, which is the Dutch company at the time, was over the moon with it. They got their investor in. And what they were doing with that was very interesting. It was turning a publicly owned broadcasting facility, which is about 1.5 million square foot. It's about 800,000 square foot of studio space, and about the remainder was then sort of post-production, editing, offices, and that sort of thing. And TCN were buying it, as I say, TCN was the Dutch business at the time, and they were buying it to turn it into a cross-media village. So take out the public broadcasting, because that was depleting. It was getting smaller. Everything was going on to Max, and post-production was much more tech-based and screen-based than big facilities. So reducing down the studios, increasing the office space, and starting to introduce lots of little companies coming in, and who were, with technology, were starting to pop up, because you can suddenly, as I say, do editing and video from Max. And, tech was changing that world. So it meant that actually it was a very clever business they were doing, buying cheap real estate and turning it into a village for all the media to come to, and all the sort of suppliers to the TV industry. And of course, that then sat very well what I'd done with Shaftesbury. It was all about branding, turning it into this media village. Amenities, so bringing in the gyms and the bars and the restaurants, bringing a bit of wow factor to what, very similar to White City, a sort of publicly owned asset that there was just a world of opportunity to turn around. So we bought that, and then I helped TCN from the sort of backers' point of view, help them sort of start to deliver that.
So you allocated the capital, you were the capital partner effectively in that relationship.
Correct, yeah. And they were the operating partner, and they were also an investor as well in it. But they operated it and got paid fees to manage it, and then got some upside if it went well. And so I helped, so that lasted about 18 months, getting on for 2 years, and then that's when I really saw the opportunity to, if you've got a clever idea or you've got capabilities, there's people around that will back you to make it happen and pay some fees and give you a share of the upside if it works. So that I learned the mechanics of JV structures, and private equity, basically. And then there was a wonderful supper we had in Holland with a chap called Rudy Stroink, who set up TCN originally in Holland. And we had supper with him and the Europa guys. And Noel said to Rudy, look, celebration supper, great deal. What more can we do together? And Rudy said, well, there is one thing you could help me do. He goes, I'd love to get into the UK market, and I'm looking for a sort of young, ambitious guy, preferably with a property background, that wants to set up his own business. And, if you know of anyone like that in the UK, then I'd love to meet them and, potentially back them to grow the business in the UK. And Noel even made the joke. He said, look, I hope you're not trying to steal Rich. And we all sort of went, no. And of course, I went to bed that night with my head absolutely spinning with ideas and thinking, this is extraordinary. And it's a little bit like dating. I woke up the next morning, we all went back to London, and that was all fine. And it's how long do you leave it before you phone up the boss of the company that you've just put some money, or on behalf of Europa put some money into, as a little sort of pipsqueak 29-year-old, and go, so I left it a couple of days, and then I phoned him up. And I said, really, hi, it's Richard Pearce here. Oh, hello. And I said, you're looking for that guy in the UK. And he goes, yes. I think I might know who it is. And he just went, I thought you might. And that was how, we started in the UK.
Amazing. Quick one from me. If you haven't already subscribed or followed this show on the podcast or app where you listen or watch, please do. It takes 10 seconds and helps tremendously. I've got really big plans for the People, Property, Place podcast, and that one small action really, really helps grow the show and the presence and enables us to keep doing what we're doing. So if you haven't already, please follow or like on the platform you watch or listen to. Thanks so much. And also, in terms of to the point, your schooling, your education, each role, whether it was by luck, judgment, what have you, gave you just the different skills to be able to put yourself in that position, to be able to pull everything together, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, it definitely wasn't ever a plan in that way. But I'm a great believer in you make your own luck. You've got to be open to opportunity, I don't think anyone's just lucky. I think you make your own luck to a certain degree, but you're also always open to seeing a positive in things. So I definitely always put everything into each role. But going back to that point about knowing when to make a decision, I was never scared of going, actually, do you know what? This is the moment to do it. So, yeah, looking back, I mean, it couldn't have been a better schooling, to use your phrase. Management, valuation, investment agency, then principal side to do the branding and the piecing together real estate, and then a bit of private equity. I mean, it's a bit like, in fact, it was a lot better than the university course I did, but it was, so looking back, it was absolutely all the aspects you need. But that was really by being open to opportunity rather than sophisticated plan.
How did the role kind of evolve? So Rudy said, I thought you'd call. Was it square away some paperwork and then go and resign, and Rob turn around and go, I knew you were going to do that? It
was pretty quick, yeah. I think Noel and Rob knew that private equity wasn't for me. I think the corporate world, the flying around, the Excel spreadsheets, and they knew that I wanted to be in property, sleeves rolled up and doing, standing behind and monitoring other people doing fun stuff was not for me. It was like a bad dream, sort of watching them, do all this amazing development, and I was just there to monitor and make sure that whatever the business plan was, they were hitting that month. That I think they knew that wasn't for me. So it wasn't any great surprise. I met another brilliant man, Clay Van Burden, who hilariously was head of marketing at TCN, who was sent over to do the joint venture agreement. So I met with him in a Indian restaurant in Carnaby Street, and we sat over a beer and drew up this, joint venture agreement, and all very Dutch style. And we agreed to do this, and TCM will put in 12% priority, and anything else is owned 50-50. And it was no more complicated than that. And they gave me a loan of 185,000 euros. And they said, right, you go and set up a limited business in the UK. We'll have one share each. We've got equity available that you will pay 12% on. Otherwise, if you can find it cheaper, go for it. And we'll grow a investment and fee earning business in the UK. And they said, here's 185,000 euros for working capital. You can either pay yourself 185,000 euros and last a year, or you can put that into, seed, or not seed capital, but, searching out deals and getting something over the line. And so it was no more complicated than that. And so I put together, amazing in my mind, business plans of buying all sorts of things. And they were TCM were very concept-driven real estate developers. So, TCN stood for Trammell Crow Netherlands, and Rudy had worked with Trammell Crow in the States in the early 90s, and they'd worked exclusively together through the 90s. And then Trammell Crow wanted to extract from Europe, I think around the 2001 Twin Towers incident. So Rudy bought them out, and the name became TCN at the time. And so it was a very sort of American influence of creating, again, concept-driven real estate. So they did a lot of trade fairs where they'd buy old warehouses and brand them into a sort of furniture trade centre. It was a bit like a permanent trade fair. And that came from Trammell Crow in Dallas. So they built quite a few of these around Europe and were very, very successful, and because it was high-income stuff. As I say, then they parted ways with Trammell Crow in 2001, I think it was. And so really by 2006, when I then partnered with TCN in Holland, it was very much TCN was a Dutch brand. And, I would go around the UK saying I'm part of this European business, and it's very concept driven. So, that's how we started, yeah.
Was there a personal cost for you at that time to take the business on, or?
In terms of
just the personal cost of leaving Europa, leaving kind of the secure job, or was that not even a factor in terms of your mind of, you're effectively given 50% split in the business, 185 grand to go. There wasn't really that much risk at the time in terms of perceived risk to do it?
No, not really. I was 30 years old. I played around with house buying and developments on my own. Buying a flat, doing it up, selling it, buying the next one. So I had a bit of kind of, stability in that way. So I bought a house in Brixton that, was all had gone the right way. So I wasn't under, that was the only liability I had. I was single, didn't have any kids. So it's kind of nothing to lose, really. Bit of reputation, but, you can recover that. So no, there was no, I didn't have any feeling of risk at all, really. I mean, I'd structured it in a way that I had this great partner. They had capital if I needed it. I had great network, and lots of youthful enthusiasm. I wouldn't be doing it now with 3 kids and a Labour government, but that's a different story.
Tell me about your first deal.
It was amazing. It happened quickly. It was down in Brixton, and as I say, I bought a house in Brixton, and in fact, my sister-in-law had moved to Brixton. She's in the creative industry, so she was down there in the very early days and introduced us to the world of Brixton. And back in 2005, it was walking to the tube in a suit was, you felt a little bit uncomfortable, if I'm honest. And but it was changing fast, and it was just an amazing community down there, amazing atmosphere, and end of the Victoria line. And anyway, this building Piano House, in fact, which my brother's company were having rented space in at the time, and the owner wanted to sell it. And so I met with the owner in the West End, and he really liked my enthusiasm and vision, I guess, because he had the option of selling it to Workspace, who at the time were just a very corporate sort of blue and yellow signs and with no passion, and that's changed considerably now. But at the time, he viewed them as a sort of bit of a cop-out. The guy had owned it for 15 years and sort of built up this lovely community of small businesses, albeit in a very sort of basic way. So he really liked our idea of coming in, branding it, and making it a creative and digital hub. And so I managed to persuade him to sell it to us. And those were the days when TCN had a bit of capital, and so they put in the equity side of it with their priority return. And I went to RBS and borrowed the other money we needed, and we bought that in December 2006. So it was 3 months between. It's a bit like learning to swim. You sort of let go of the safety of a job in July, and then you're sort of swimming fast to try and get your deal over the line before you run out of money or run out of breath. And so we managed to grab onto the Brixton deal by December. And that then was income, it was fees, and also it was a little bit of profile that you could actually do deals, because having gone from DGZ, you've got an amazing agency and corporate contact-based network across the industry. But that doesn't last very long. It's
once you're out the door.
Once you're out the door, if you've
out of mind.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly it, and that's fair enough, because everyone's got to earn their fees, and that's the way the world is set. But, you wanted to get a couple of deals done, so you were still a thing in the property world. And so we bought this building. It was 40,000 square foot. It was sort of half empty, and it had a pretty unsavory nightclub in the basement. I was up there and I was managing it. So I was doing all the service charge and sitting in a little room in the office. I'd sort of told the guy that was selling it that, we were a big Dutch company, a European company. He was a little bit surprised when on day one of buying it, I asked if I could move into his office and have a desk in the corner because I didn't know anywhere. I was still working out of my flat in Brixton at the time. So I then sat in the corner of his office in the building and did all the service charge. And, even just trying to get a phone line in was taking all my time. It was a nightmare, but you sort of just get on with these things. We had the police come round to tell us that, did we know that the nightclub in the basement was the biggest gun exchange in South London? It was some pretty unpleasant times as well whilst we found our feet and just changed this thing from it was a fairly neglected sort of office building with anyone and everyone that would rent space cheaply, to start to turn it around. I managed to persuade a couple of creative agencies alongside my brother's company to come in and start to turn the tide and really turn it into a sort of destination outside the West End. And you look at the West End at the time, the rents were probably £35-40 a square foot, and we were £10 a square foot. So, it's all about being affordable and being a destination, and using all those Shaftesbury learnings to say, actually, if you brand the thing right and create a destination, create a community, people will come. And happily, that's what's happened. Yeah.
How has the business evolved over the years? And can you just talk to me about the other deals that you were involved with too?
So that was deal one. That was right on sort of plan. The next one was completely left field, which was we bought a company called Express Park Construction Company. Well, it was actually Express Park Development Company, and it was Dutch owned. And so it came through the Dutch connection. And they had a very successful distribution park down in Bridgewater. And then they'd, off the back of that, built this sort of development business with a lot of pipeline deals. So they were going through the process to get preferred developer status in Rotherham to do the town centre regeneration. They had 300 acres near Doncaster with a lake that they were going to do a residential and mixed-use development. And so Rudy, owner of TCN, was just the ultimate deal maker. So he'd had this deal in Holland and phoned me up and said, right, Richard, we're going to buy this development company in the UK. It's going to form your platform. You're going to run it. You're going to be MD, and it's going to accelerate our growth. Brilliant. So this was in 2007, 2008. So that there was some distress in that business. So not distress, but you needed to keep earning the fees, because I think there was about 32 members of staff and a lot of development opportunities, but not a huge amount of portfolio to support those numbers. So they had to be building stuff. So I found myself managing director of 32 people, all turned to look at me going, right, what's the plan? And it was, 2008. So I had to mothball quite a lot of the ambitious. I mean, they were planning to build offices on a business park outside Doncaster, which wasn't very popular with the banks. We had to get the development opportunity over the line in Rotherham. That was a big one, the town centre regeneration. Had a fantastic team up there, development guys. So there was a lot of just very fast asset management, corporate restructuring that was required. And I was slightly dumped in it, if I'm honest, because it was suddenly, right, crack on, here's a great deal, make the most of it. But we just got on with it. And we restructured with the banks in terms of, selling sites, paying down some debt. Unfortunately, having to reduce the team quite dramatically because they had a whole construction business. And clearly there was no construction going on. So it was a very difficult time because there was a lot of restructuring and reduction in the team. But at the time, there was just no other option at the time. And we managed to sort of, get that stabilised. And then off the back of that, with a team, start to build some other opportunities, which were a little bit more back on trend of what we'd set out originally to do. We did build out the town centre regeneration based around a Tesco's that we built in Rotherham.
And we sold off. We got change of use planning wise out in Doncaster and got a hotel built and pubs and sold off the land to Taylor Wimpey and generally worked through the sort of pipeline. But it was definitely a lot off piste of what I was setting out to do. But it was a challenging time, but it gave us scale and it meant that we had a platform then to sort of build on. So on from that 2009, we, in fact, through some of those operations down in Bridgewater, found out that the site next to Temple Meads train station was needing to be sold. Old James Locke, who's sat in this seat before, was at Ballymore. So that was interesting because he is a great mate of ours, actually family friend through my wife and he being at university together. And so anyway, I phoned up James Locke, and we agreed a price on that. And he, you know him well, he was pretty ballsy about it. We got consent for 250 apartments on this site, and this is what it was worth last year. And I was like, well, things have moved on. It's 2009. And he mentioned Nama, I know, when he met with you, and they needed to get that site sold. So we had some pretty tough negotiations with old James. He likes a bit of a wrangle. In fact, I fell out with him, and I think we probably put the phone down on each other. And then 2 days later, he was at my wedding on the Saturday of 2009. So we sort of put down the weapons for a weekend, had a good old laugh, and then back to it on Monday. But anyway, we got that deal done, and that was actually on behalf of. We brought in some new investment because by that time, Rudy, unfortunately, in Holland was under the cosh for the financial crisis and was pretty exposed on the European stuff. So we were sort of on our own. He still had 50% of the business, but we then started to act as a sort of, co-investor and operator for other investors. And so using our brand and our reputation, and we brought in an investor. I always made it look like it was some great corporate structuring, but I'd actually found a mate from Suffolk who knew someone that had some money, and I was buying it off Gemma's mate from uni, and we sort of managed to cobble this deal together. But it was very difficult times, and trying to find the money and stuff was not easy. But this chap from Suffolk had managed to get some money out of an Icelandic bank that had it in, and he was pretty keen to put it in bricks and mortar. So it came together, and we bought what's become Temple Studios and Temple 1852. So that's about 60,000 square foot of workspace next to the train station there. And it's been phenomenally successful and still offers very affordable, very cool workspace with access straight onto the platform at Temple Meads. And now the university are building an innovation campus, 500 million next door. It's become a real sort of hub. So, we won awards for the Enterprise Business of the Year down there, which was great. Stood on the stage with George Osborne, the Chancellor at the time, and waxed lyrical about whatever he was doing on these enterprise zones. And actually out the back of that, then someone in the audience was the Economic Regeneration guys from Bath Council. And they got in contact and said, we love what you've done in Bristol by, regenerating these buildings and nurturing young companies and bringing SMEs together. And, we'd love some help on these buildings in Bath. And this was in 2000, that was 2009, probably 2011 by that point when we'd done the developments in 2012. And it was all singing and dancing down in Bristol. So I had started the conversation with Bath, and we managed to do the deal on Newark Works. Took from 2012 to 2019 to sign the contract.
Wow.
So you've got to be a long-term view on some of these things. But it was worth it. I mean, if you look at Newark Works on our website now, it's just the most phenomenal development. It took 3 years to do that one, but on site. But that's another 40,000 square foot digital and creative campus. So that was great. In the meantime, we bought Monarch House in Bristol, and that was a classic fund type buy. I won't name the fund, but they'd bought it for 3.5 million and just taken the income. And then lo and behold, when it got to sort of 2 years left on the income, it's an office in Bristol. And lo and behold, when it got to 2 years left, they had to sell it. Wasn't in their profile. So we bought it for £750,000, and we refurbished it and put all the tenants back in it and sold it to a fund for 3.5 million again. So as I say, you've just got to be open to opportunity. And then what else did we do? The partnership with the BBC, 2012. because of our activities in Media Park and with the Dutch, I got in contact with the BBC and said to them, look, you've got all these old buildings, we could turn it into a creative campus. And it just
look at what we've done elsewhere, kind of replicate the model.
Correct.
And I guess at this stage, you're quite focused in terms of actually what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly right. And we had examples of what we'd done elsewhere. And Chris Kane was our contact at BBC. He was a visionary, actually, at the BBC in property. And he was, we managed to persuade him that, yes, we might be young upstarts, but we'd kind of done it enough. And also because we could take the trustees of the BBC over to Media Park, Hilversum, very similar to White City, 1.5 million square feet, 800 odd of studios. So it's exactly replicated an old public broadcasting facility that needed going into private hands and modernising. So it was a very good test case to show the BBC what's possible at White City. And so we took on 80,000 square foot of their buildings and called Centre House. And it was just an ugly building. And it was a partnership actually with my brother and sister-in-law who were in as I say, the creative agency from Brixton. And we put together a plan whereby we wanted to attract startup digital media businesses post-crisis. And so it had to be cheap. So the deal we did with the BBC is said, look, we're not going to buy the building off you. We haven't got that sort of money, but we will take a lease and we'll give you a turnover on it. And whatever we make, you'll get a percentage of that. But most importantly, the value outside of the monetary value is the perception and the placemaking that we can do, because we can basically demonstrate that the Soho buzz, the Soho atmosphere can be created at White City, which at the time was, wasteland, really. Had a lot of recycling facility. I think it was used for filming, probably when, in a fictional story, someone needed to be buried somewhere, they'd film it on that. So it was pretty rough. It was just on the other side of the White City Tube. And so we said, look, we can create an atmosphere. We can bring the right crowd. And we knew then that they were moving a lot of their facilities up to Manchester. So they had to do something with all the 1.5 million square foot building. So we created something called the Ugly Campus. And the website was lovelyInside.com. And it was as simple as that to say, look, startup businesses don't need grand, towers and impressive office buildings. They just need to come together and, collaborate and do something a bit different. And so, we had banners on the outside saying, we are ugly, you could be too, and lots of irreverent kind of marketing that really kind of got the place on the map and got people noticing. And it just attracted young digital businesses, entrepreneurs. And we had about 60 businesses there. And the joy of the structure of the deal is we could offer super cheap rents, and we actually had a waiting list, and we could be selective as to who came in, because it was a real privilege to be there, because it was half the rent of anything else in West London. So we created a really interesting crowd there, 50 odd businesses, I guess 500-600 people, and the BBC loved it, because I always said to them at the beginning, if this goes well, it's all BBC. If it goes badly, it's TCN. And with reputational risk, that was an attractive thing. But I have to say, when we sat in a meeting room with Chris Kane and a couple of others at BBC, and we said, so here's Centre House, and here's our proposal. We'd like to call it the Ugly Campus. There was a stunned silence, and we thought we'd blown it at that point. But Chris, to his credit, said, I love it. It's irreverent, it's different. And that was a fascinating deal. Yeah.
Provocative. It's exactly what you want. And I guess, going back to that waiting list point is what you did at Carnaby, going back there.
Yeah, exactly.
Creating that buzz.
Exactly.
And that fear of missing out and wanting to be part of the action.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you talk to me about the business today in terms of portfolio over and above what you've kind of just touched on? And you've built a team as well. It hasn't just been you on that journey.
Yes,
as well.
absolutely.
The human
exactly.
team and leadership aspect as well.
Exactly. In 2007-8, when we bought Express Park Development, I woke up, as I say, with a team of 32 people, HR, tax, VAT, and I don't remember any of those seminars at Nottingham Trent. I mean, I didn't go to all of them, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have learnt enough to cover that off. So I brought in a great friend from Suffolk, actually, Toby Bidwell, who is very good in property, but also just very entrepreneurial. So he'd run some importing businesses from the Far East, and clothing businesses, makeup businesses, franchises in sort of department stores. And so he'd employed a lot of people. He knew business, and I was sat there going, look, in 5 years' time, this is going to be amazing. And he'd be going, yeah, but next week we've got a VAT bill. And you'd be like, oh,
what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, is that bad or is that good? And so Toby has been brilliant on the operational side of it, and everything from in the early days it was the running the operations of the actual buildings. He's more than happy to go and knock on a door and remind someone they haven't paid their rent, and the real nuts and bolts of operations, which I'm not good at because I came from working at DTZ and Shaftesbury, and that stuff just sort of happens. I mean, I hadn't seen a bank account for a business before setting up on my own, and that's just sort of dealt with by someone else, So Toby was brilliant coming in and helping HR operations. So he was sort of number two in, and we own it together. So I very early on just felt that, inspired by Rudy really, that partnerships 50-50 is good in a partnership. And so he bought in at an early stage, and we've done everything absolutely equally together and never had an argument because you're in it together. So that's been a fantastic relationship. That continues now. And then we had a lot of great colleagues come in from the corporate purchase. And then as we've evolved, we've adapted the team to bring in, they were very good on the management side and the development side. But as we've grown the portfolio, so a typical building for us now is 40 to 70,000 square foot of workspace. Might have a bit of resi because it's an old building that kind of works. Cafes, amenity at ground floor possibly. And probably 500 to 700 occupants, all in digital, creative, tech type businesses. That's typical. And we've got 9 of those sites. And so the team sort of adapted to deal with that. So we've got a good marketing team. We've got a good membership team now, which we'll come on to. Very good asset managers, fantastic finance team who we run all our own service charge, all of the accounts and every aspect of running the buildings we do ourselves. And so there's a team, including we have 2 site staff on each location as well. So they're campus managers. So they're running the buildings. And so including those, there's probably about 26 of us now. I guess 10 to 12 head office. And just talented people in all the right areas, basically. So yeah, we're about 9 buildings now. Bristol, Bath, Reading, London, Norwich, Birmingham. And it's a portfolio that runs very well. We had various dalliances with managing agents helping us. Didn't go so well, mainly because managing agents are set up, it only really works on scale. And the traditional model of running lots of office buildings for a big institution where there's thin margins, but there's a lot of it works. But when you've got the B2C, the business to consumer relationships, it doesn't really work to turn up and demand rent, or you're going to kick them out or write them a letter to say it's in arrears. These companies are long gone by the time you've got hold of them. You've got to be on it every day. And so it doesn't work to have that outsourced management. So we've structured it so that we run everything ourselves.
Talk to me about the Curious network, because that's the next piece of the puzzle and the evolution of the business as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So for all of these years, when you look back at from the very earliest days, that membership and that community piece has always been central to it. So, I mean, pick on one, Ugly Campus, we had the most incredible network of entrepreneurs, innovators, talented people in all sorts of sectors. And it was in the buildings, it's brilliant because you have this magic of a community where people are friends, they work together. The marketer needs the graphic designer, needs the PR, whatever it might be. And then you get clusters, either life sciences or space innovation down in Bath, for example. And so within each building, we've always had these amazing communities. And there's so much value to the community, to each person being in it. So, we have very high occupancy rates, 92% at the moment, which is as much as you want really, because you need to allow people to grow and change. So we run at about 92% occupancy, and we have very strong retention rates, because being part of a community is much more than just being in a building and having the cheapest rent or the best view, whatever it might be. It's all about being part of that community. So we've looked at that and said, okay, well, within our buildings, between Norwich and Birmingham, Bath and Bristol, all these places, we've got about 5,000 daily users coming into the buildings. And in each location, the energy is palpable. You can literally go into these buildings and get the buzz. And how do we expand that so it's cross location? And then we had conversations with Bath Council, for example, when we were regenerating Newark Works. Bath said, "Oh, what are you doing in Norwich? Because we'd like to talk to the council about what their policies are, how they're doing it, because Norwich seems to be a really vibrant place." And I was amazed. Bath are saying we're looking to that as a bit of an exemplar of how to do, run cities or not so much cities, but regeneration, how to encourage employment. And so suddenly you've got a Bath Council wanting to be connected with Norwich Council, and we were sitting in the middle of this sort of amazing community. So we then created the Curious Network, and sadly the demise of TCN in Europe was in 2012. Took 2 years to buy the share that we didn't have off the administrators in Holland. So we became independent, Toby and I owning the whole business from 2014, having bought out the Rudy's share. And so that then allowed us to do our own thing completely from the UK since 2014, which included changing the meaning of TCN from Trammell Crow Netherlands, which, of course, means something to people that know Trammell Crow or know Savills or know the property industry. But we really are talking to tech and digital companies, and TCN's just letters. As soon as you mention the Curious Network, it evokes all sorts of interesting thoughts of people, and they remember it. So we pivoted, I think it's probably the trendy word to use, isn't it? So TCN is the Curious Network. And what we've started to do is build a platform that starts to connect the different communities between the different sites. So now suddenly you've got and it's either via a website or an app, etc. You've got the magic that's in each building starting to then go between the different sites. And because we've got such an interesting demographic of 20 to 50-year-olds, call it, so I'm included, in really interesting sectors, space innovation I mentioned, all the tech industries, the digital industries. It's a fascinating community of people that really start to connect with each other. And so we're expanding the Curious Network at the moment across our portfolio. And then where it's really interesting for me is how much further we can take that, because the Curious Network, we talk about 4 pillars effectively. That's connection, community, talent, and funding. So those are the 4 sort of pillars that we use. Connection is simply members' database. So you can go on the app and you can select all of the different sectors you're interested in. You can contact each other. There's discounted rates to work with each other. So rather than just have the sort of bump into each other in the corridor in a building, now you can bump into each other between, because for example, Norwich is big into agri-tech. So we've got a couple of businesses in the southwest that are focused on that. But Norwich is a market leader in agri-tech because of the connections with the universities. So suddenly you've got synergies across those locations. And then the connections into the university in Norwich for our businesses in other locations. The other way around, life sciences, someone up in Norwich or in Birmingham, they're into life sciences, connect with Bath University now through our network. So that's the sort of connections element. And then the community is very much events and bringing people together, because it doesn't matter how many times we talk about social media and working from home and how amazing not being in the office is, community and coming together is where the magic happens. And I think we haven't quite put that discussion to bed, but it was getting well on the way that you want to be together to really get stuff done, other than working on an Excel where you can look at a screen and someone else can be somewhere else. But to really grow businesses, grow talent, we know that you've got to come together. So that's the community, and we encourage that through events, bringing people from different sites together. So that's connection, that's community. And then you've got the talent, which is really jobs board, connecting with universities. Our businesses are desperately in need of interns. So students can get involved in the platform and they can see what interns are available. Likewise, companies can go to these universities and say, right, we need some research on a focus group we're about to do a marketing campaign. You can go to the Bath Spa or Bath University and go to the digital marketing course and they will get paid a grant to do the research for the small companies. So this ecosystem that we're building between universities, between business, and then the final one is funding. And of course, there's lots of people wanting to fund good ideas coming out of universities. You see it a lot, actually, at the moment. There's a big thing about we're not very good at growing the companies that are being nurtured in the best universities in the world, but we're not good at growing these companies and retaining them in the UK. So the funding aspect is all about then connecting up good ideas, good businesses, funding partners. So those, the connection, community, talent, and funding are the 4 sort of pillars that it's based on. And it's gaining some incredible traction, which is really exciting.
I was going to say, because I've been running Rockborn for over 7 years, and I've spoken to a number of different co-working or office-driven businesses, and they list out all of the benefits of joining them, and one of them is our app and our community, and you get really excited about that as a business owner. But you kind of join one of these groups, and you go on the app, and it's clunky, no one uses it. There's a promise of being able to kind of get introduced or special rates. Yeah. Do people actually use it? And then how do you incentivize people using it to kind of really have a point of difference? Because I guess for you, it's creating enterprise value and cross-pollination and connection and stickiness, and it helps the wider business. How do you get people to actually leverage and utilize that?
Yeah, we see it a lot. It's very, very difficult to get an app working and engagement and use of an app, because fundamentally buildings are quite boring. There's nice ones with nice interiors, but you're trying to engage. And where our industry, the real estate industry, is having to change is that we've always been a B2B industry, save leisure and retail, but really it's still B2B because you rent it to a business and then they connect with the consumer. And what we're seeing in the real estate industry is that we're becoming a B2C business in a lot of areas. Retail clearly has happened, and for many years you've had really good shopping centre operators who have apps and connect with their community, the consumer rather. And offices is now doing the same. It's less of a B2B. You're not really connecting with the office manager or the FD who's going to make the decision. You're having to appeal to the end users, and that's a big shift for office owners. And so when you get these apps, because you have to have an app because every building's got to have community, it's really a real estate owner going, we'll do an app and put some stuff on it. Where we've come from is with passion and energy over 15, 18 years is to build these communities in the buildings. And now we're seeing the need and the want to connect because of the interesting ecosystem, the universities, the small businesses, funders. And so the app is coming on the back of that to sort of satisfy that need. And I think that's probably the difference because of the user group and the ecosystem is interested and wanting to connect. And I think where, for me, where the Curious Network will grow is then starting to offer a plug and play solution to other owners, because the SME community is growing within our membership, and having more buildings involved is only a good thing for SMEs. There's more connections. And big corporate owners of office buildings are having to carve their space up. They're having to do smaller lettings, provide the trendy bike stands and the showers and the cafe downstairs. But they're really not equipped to do the B2C piece. And if they do, it's kind of through necessity. And businesses pick up on that pretty quick, that it's a bit of a pain rather than a main event for them. And so I can see us starting to have a sort of almost a plug and play for big owners where they can actually subscribe into the Curious Network to then provide that community and those events to their occupiers. And of course, it's a brilliant sales tool. Come into our building, you're part of the Curious Network, connect with Bath University, connect with Manchester, Edinburgh, whoever it is, connect with these 5,000 daily users who are all in business. And so, that's where I can see it evolving. And with hybrid working and change, it's basically inefficient and lonely, particularly for small businesses, sitting at home, maybe a day a week, maybe 2 days a week. But what we're doing is introducing that connection and community that's kind of been lost in the office. And there's very good operators, Work Life and Fora and, all these Runway East are all fantastic co-working operations that are doing exactly what we're talking about.
but that's only a fraction of the market. X and Y, they've got great partnership with office buildings. So there are different ways of doing it, but there is still the majority of the marketplace that are grappling with, I've done the amazing building, the fit out's incredible. There's lots of small units. I've done the fitted out unit ready for all these small companies, but still they're not getting the traction that a co-working space is, because it's missing that magic dust. And that's where the Curious Network can then work with and assist to give access to this ecosystem that we're building.
Where do you see the opportunity in the market at the moment?
It's definitely fragmented. There's a lot of micro sections to the industry that are doing well, and then there's some pretty well talked about areas like offices that have struggled with all the changes going on. I think one of the big areas in the market that is becoming apparent is the scarcity value of real estate is no longer what it was. Everyone's got choice, whether that be office, whether it be retailing online or going out to a shop. So I think there is definitely a change whereby you used to be able to buy a good bit of real estate next to a train station or next to a busy road and it would hold its value, whereas now actually people across all the sectors have got more choice. Work from home, come to the office, shop online, go to a shop, for example. So I think one of the changes is that there's a lot more value in the operators of real estate than there is just simply the landowners of the real estate. And I think you can see that in the office sector is the obvious one, because they're having to partner with operators, co-working particularly, to generate the value, generate the lettings and the sales and the income. So I think as we go forward, a little bit more like the Americans and Europe actually, it will be about the operators. Unite's a good example on student housing. You're starting to get really good operators on logistics. Because it's a much more involved business that goes back a little bit to the B2C side of things. You've got to connect with your consumer, whereas before it was B2B. So, yeah, I think, obviously I'd say that because we're an operator as well. But I think across all sectors, retail, office, logistics, hotels, student, and of course now the build to rent, I think the value is going to be increasingly in operators to then create the value for the real estate, which is a big change.
I think you're 100% right, and it kind of mirror matches what I'm hearing as well with a lot of businesses thinking about we're at an inflection point. How we've generated alpha over the last 10 years isn't necessarily the same way we're going to generate that moving forward, and increasingly so how are we going to access the market and how are we going to kind of create some of that operational, get into the operational efficiencies and drive the income that way.
Yeah,
so
turns out Shaftesbury were ahead of their time.
Indeed. As we draw to a close, Richard, a question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, if I gave you £500 million worth of capital, who are the people, what property and which place would you allocate that capital?
From a people point of view, I'd definitely bring back in some of the Dutch. Rudy and my sort of equivalent at TCN, Ariane, were brilliant entrepreneurs, and anything's possible. That sort of Dutch trading mentality, big thinking, how can we do it different? They were very clever operators, so I'd definitely bring them in. We've got a fantastic team, at TCN, and I'd certainly have them on the journey as well. Our MD's far better at running a business than I am, so he'd be there, and all the team that run the assets. So I think that's probably the people side of it. But bringing in Rudy and Ariane would definitely fire us up and probably take us global in some random direction, but it'd be good fun along the way. I think in terms of if it was with the 500 million, I've never got the right brand for it, but it would be do the opposite of what the funds do fund. And it ceases to amaze me. There's huge talent and clearly, best in the business that run all these funds. But the example I gave about Monarch House, I just find it extraordinary that, that the herd mentality, analysts will tell you that this is the sector to avoid and this is the one to go into. Well, clearly that's creating bubbles and gluts. And so, yeah, I think I'd definitely be going along to all the analysts' updates, and whatever they were recommending, I'd be looking at the other stuff, because the funds then need to sell all of that and they need to buy all of that. And so I've always felt if you just do the opposite, then that feels like you'll be buying cheap stuff and selling expensive stuff. So if it wasn't that, I think infrastructure is really interesting. I think, that's the probably more corporate answer, but, data centers, wind farms, all of that infrastructure is so important.
And so, that would be certainly somewhere you're always going to be making the right decisions and getting some income out of it. In terms of where I'd do it, UK is great. I mean, there's so much opportunity. There's disruption. There's opportunity. So I'd struggle to go outside UK, I think, mainly because I understand, pounds and square feet and legals over here. And I admire anyone that goes off to Europe or further afield and gets their head around. Real estate's so nuanced, and every street corner and every side of a street is different. So yeah, I admire people that make money overseas, but maybe it's my Suffolk roots. I'd stick to the UK.
And in terms of, I was going to really press you on an asset class.
I love the office sector. So it's there, it's changing. There's more opportunity than ever. I'd spent a lot of time in Bristol, and the assets down there are phenomenal. It's very clear to see now what's going to work, what's not going to work. And I'd have some of the what's going to work, the top spec, amazing space, environmentally absolutely, fantastic buildings, roof terraces, gyms. I'd have some of that, and then I'll be buying lots of offices because you either convert them, and with the cost of building anything now, you've got something that's already built. And I suspect quite a lot of offices will come back into, pretty valuable use. So I think between if you stuck with offices and you had the top end stuff, you had probably the middle range that will come back in some shape or form, and then you've got the stuff that's never going to be offices and probably will make very good retail and residential and hotels. So it doesn't feel like you need to go much further than that, but I'm a simple bloke.
Richard, you've had a phenomenal background story, and you're a great orator as well. And I'm really excited to see what you and the team go on to do ahead of this next cycle. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
That's a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information, or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next time.